if you don't need or need to worry about legal anytime you have a brilliant idea, right? I mean, how many ideas are stopped because someone just says, well, is that legal? Right. And I'm not talking about like, oh, you should go create a meth selling startup, right? Like, no, just anything financial and innovative, and let people be able to innovate or at least think about innovative ideas without, oh, well, we just raised $1 million, but half of that has to go to attorneys, right? As opposed to human capital and tech investment where it is way better spent. So,
welcome to the ATX DAO Podcast, the hub for exploring the forefront of blockchain technology in Austin's Web3 community. We connect you with innovators within ATX DAO and beyond as we venture into the world of decentralized technology. So crack open a beer and join us for a front row seat to learn about the innovations and trends shaping our digital future. This is the ATX DAO Podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the ATX DAO Podcast. We are very excited to welcome a special guest today. We have Sam Armas with us. Sam, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you.
what is going on, guys? Hello from sunny and warm Florida. I was just in Dallas and it was freezing. So I don't know how you guys handle that, but good luck with that one.
Yeah, the weather's like really wonky. Climate change, full effect, man. Like, it's actually working out well for us, honestly. I feel like if we get snow in North Texas, I'm like, dude, I'm never fucking leaving Texas. It's awesome. I can go ski in the winters. In the summers, we got it nice and hot and balmy. It's the best of both worlds.
I'm okay with no winter. I'm like, if the whole world could be Florida, I'd prefer that. So hopefully I'm hoping everything gets warmer because I hate the cold. So I'm like, cool. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. I'm good with that.
That is also, beach weather is always, beach life is actually pretty dope too. That is true. Very hard to get shit done though with sand in your keyboard. So that's true. That's the other part.
True.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Sam, glad to have you with us, man. So would love to just kind of kick us off just by hearing a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into crypto, that type of thing, and we'll kind of go from there.
I mean, I guess my original origin story for Bitcoin is in 2013. I was in high school and I had a buddy who like knew how to make like bombs in his garage, but was failing high school, right? Like, Sam, you got to get into this Bitcoin stuff. I'm like, okay, Tyler. We're like, well, what does that mean? It actually gave me Bitcoin and made me like my first wallet. And the irony is all these years later, he lost his, still had mine. That's just like Tyler to lose his wallet being early. He's always early and then just goofs it up somehow, but he's an awesome guy. So that was 2013. And in 2016, I'd kind of delved into Bitcoin just on my own, and someone heard about my Bitcoin interest and they're like, hey, actually, we need someone to do some presentations, research for USS SOCOM out of MacDill. That's United States Special Operations Command. So I was like, okay, cool. So that's where I kind of started my professional like career in Bitcoin. So I was at SOCOM, kind of doing a presentation research for them. I was at the State Department and I was actually doing work for the State Department, like research on blockchain and Bitcoin too at the time. And I came back Florida from DC. I come from a very like politically minded family. So politics was always talked around the dinner table, no arguments, but just like, hey, what's going on today type deal. And so I had taken an interest. I worked at a law firm. I decided, hey, I want to work in the Florida House. I worked in the Florida House for a little bit, ended up working for a lobbying firm. And then 2017, I was like, well, no one's really lobbying on behalf of like Bitcoin companies. And so I pitched that to a lobbying firm in 2017. Like, people still say we're early, but I was 2017 early, unfortunately, or fortunately. And they were like, nah, we don't want to do that. So I started my lobbying firm in 2017, 2018, which ended up also, I created the first like state association focused on Web3 and blockchain, the Florida Blockchain Business Association, which is still, that name's so funny to me because at the time, do we use blockchain or Bitcoin was like a big discussion in our name. And so it's just interesting to see how those conversations either evolve or stay with you. And so I've been doing that for like 5-6 years, passed 6 different bills in the Florida legislature. Most like well-known one was our anti-central bank digital currency bill. But we had set up, like, the state of Florida has government officials who specialize in blockchain because of legislation that we passed. I did that, and I still help manage and run that with the team. But then now, over the past 2 to 3 years, my focus has kind of turned national and international because in essence, I'm a political strategist, right? So people kind of hire me and say, hey, here's a bill I don't like, or I want to get politically involved. What do I do? And I give them the step-by-step on how that's going to happen and where we need to put money, who we need to put our efforts and energy behind. And then I've gotten more into the media space as well and teamed up with various influencers and kind of got my own media going because in politics, it's all about moving people, money, and attention. And so I was always good at moving people and money, but I needed to learn how to better move attention. So then obviously media is how you do that. So now I kind of offer like a range of like political consulting services, and we'll have companies from like Asia or Europe or in the United States be like, okay, well, we need a US liaison. Like, what do we do? My expertise and specialty still being in Florida. That's where I'm based, which is very fortunate for me because most of Trump's cabinet now is made up of Floridians, right? And Florida has an outsized influence on this administration. Wish I could say I planned all that. I did not. It's just happenstance, but that's how politics is. It's all betting on relationships, and sometimes your relationships really pay off, and sometimes they don't. Now I'm in a very, very solid position, given our current political climate, to kind of push the agendas that I want to push.
Yeah, that's so cool. Like, I mean, one of the cool things is like we just met through circumstance, right? Like where you say, you know, it's kind of like I feel like a lot of like crypto and the entrepreneurial experience in life in general is like you bet on people, right? You invest in people, right? And we just met at this random thing at the North American Blockchain, Association conference in Dallas last year, the one that you just attended. And, like, I think there was like, hey, here's a guy who's like super smart and like is going to do something very interesting, comes from an eclectic background. Many people who come from like, when you say SOCOM and State Department, I'm like, oh my God, is this guy like a CIA spook? Like he's basically asking you for like what's going on in like the ridiculous world of DeFi. But like, your policy vision and like really wanting to make like a grassroots effort to say, hey guys, we need real clarity on this space was like cut through everything pretty good. And the fact that you're a mensch is like also a great guy, right? That also helps. But yeah, man, I'm curious to see actually about the SOCOM State Department transition to like the consultancy thing, if you don't mind me asking, because it's like dummy like me has never worked in government. And like, I just look at it and I say, this is this whole world where it's pretty slow and pretty complicated to navigate. And crypto is a whole other complicated world to navigate, but also because of the speed of tech. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on like, how did you make that transition? And like, what are your big takeaways there? I'm just curious.
I mean, it's so common in the State Department, for example. I was just doing research. I was a civilian, right? Like it wasn't like some people are like, thank you for your service. I'm like, no. Like I was not in the military. I didn't go to like basic training. It was not my gig. I was just in a good geography and had a bunch of mentors who were like, hey, you need to do this. This is what you're meant to do. Get in front of these people and educate them. When I did the presentation at SOCOM, there was FBI, CIA, DEA, DNI, like all these people are like, yeah, tell us about like this Bitcoin stuff and maybe Monero and what's going on and all kinds of stuff. It was kind of an easy transition in the sense that I was just always pursuing what I was interested in. I came from like an economics background. And what I enjoyed about economics is it teaches you a different way to think. And that's what like I use my economics degree, not really per se, right? But what was cool about learning economics was you were always presented with these scenarios and you just kind of had to figure it out. Like there was no way to prepare for a test. The test would be something completely out of left field. And you just had to figure out the best that you could, given the info that they taught you, like what made sense. And kind of in the Intel world, I really enjoyed the Intel curriculum inside of things as far as learning. It's very similar. Like they would give you what are called like wargaming scenarios, and they would be fictional countries, but it'd be kind of based off of real world events. And it was all game theory. I mean, the economics was game theory, the Intel was game theory. So it was all about like, what are the incentives behind human interaction and what people might do to give them an edge or a motivation to do X, Y, and Z. And then you have to make the best predetermined decisions off of what you think you know. I remember one session, like we were talking about different countries invading each other. And in the middle of like this exercise, I think it was about a 1 or 2 hour exercise, about an hour in, they give you new information. Go, okay, now based off this new information, what's your plan? Tree B just said this statement or something. Now you got to figure it out. And so it was cool because you're building a DAO, or whether you're looking at Bitcoin or Dogecoin or Ethereum, it's all the same stuff. It's all like, what are the incentives? Like, why are you here? We call it tokenomics, but we all know it's just basic economics and basic like game theory about what's the incentive for someone to vote in this DAO? How do we incentivize users to actually participate? Right. And that's all economics is. Economics is the marriage of like psychology and finance and figuring out why people do what they do with their habits and with their money. So for me, it was actually a very easy transition. Politics isn't much different. Like what motivates people in politics? Maybe it's money, power, fame, right? But when you have a Congress of about, over 500 people, right, and each of them having their own ambitions, and you have a presidency and like a SCOTUS, right, and all those powers trying to balance each other out, it's like, okay, so how do I navigate these people making these decisions, right? And I'm not sure that's like a skill that you can necessarily teach. You almost just have to like learn it over time, but it's definitely been useful in the kind of crypto Web3 Bitcoin space because it's all the same. It's all, human interaction and motivation and don't change.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to incentive alignment, like you said, right? And I think that ongoing thought of like trying to figure out, like you said, how do we get people to do the right thing, right? And what are the incentives that we want them to do? And how do we disincentivize the bad things, right? Like you said, it all comes back down to like you said, that perfect confluence of like game theory, psychology, and just like, okay, how do I make these people move, right? You give them the carrot, don't give them the stick, and then they will move naturally towards the carrot, right? It is nice to hear that there are people now who have basically helped structure this kind of modal of thinking going into this next administration that's coming in, right? I know like one of the cool things is that you also introduced me to a buddy of ours who I'm going to shout out, John Montague. Super cool dude. Luke, you need to meet this guy too. He's another really cool guy in Florida. I was like, Florida? Like, who the hell lives in Florida? I thought it was just like old people and like billionaires in Miami, right? But then after meeting Sam in that larger network of like people that come from Florida, finally I met one of his friends actually in Dubai, Lucas, right? Which is
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, super chance meeting. Another great guy. So it seems like, holy cow, there might be it's like the southern states are kind of like getting all the best and the brightest, right?
I mean, Florida's great. I mean, Florida's pool of talent, the environment, the people down here, not just in Miami, but where I am in Tampa Bay, is huge. A lot of people, they kind of keep it quiet sometimes when they live down here, right? They're happy to spend time in New York City, but actually live in Florida. But it's definitely a hub. I think that's going to continue because, the law of attraction and, like social networks, the more people who are here, the more people that will come here type deal. I continue to see that pipeline of talent grow. So, and I love Florida, really I do. I love the summer. I'm a big water guy. So the more time I can be on the beach or in a lake or a river, just for the lifestyle, is great. And if I need to go somewhere, I can just fly.
Yeah, man, I hear you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm an adopted son of Texas. I don't think I'm ever going to leave. I love this place.
Texas is awesome.
Yeah, Texas is great. Like, honestly, I think I've been like, to use a Texas term, right? It's like I've been unusually blessed, right? That like we have this great community in Austin as well. And it's like, part of the reason also of doing this pod is like reaching out and connecting people to our audience that is like maybe in the DAO or Texas native in our extended reach, to just be like, yo, there's this special thing happening in Florida. And like, this is a guy that you should probably reach out to and talk to if you need like, to figure out what's happening on that landscape. Right. And in Austin, very much like you said, there's this confluence of like, kind of like smart people getting talent. And that law of attraction means that like, oh, hey, there's smart people here doing things. Maybe I can ping pong other ideas off of them. And who knows, next thing you know, you're, doing a startup together. I know my co-founder's story was like, dude, he's like, I was here and I was like, bro, Austin's great. We actually met in Austin through a strange confluence of events, much like how we met, right? Chasing down sushi at like 1 a.m. in Dallas, which is kind of hilarious. But that being said, like, yeah, it's really, really cool, man. I'm starting to see that there are clearly these pockets for this new tech standard that are out of the typical norm, right? You would always say the Bay, or it'd have to be New York City. And like, these are the two big think center points. But like now it's like rapidly changing. Like it seems like conservatism in a way, also kind of like this mix of cultural kind of influence, having the ability to be kind of a free thinker, which we typically would associate with these two, extreme points of New York and San Francisco, is now gravitated towards places like Wyoming, Texas, Florida, which is super cool to see. It's like, yeah, it's like we're seeing history being made as we live it.
I couldn't agree more.
Luke, do you want to jump in on the FBVA stuff a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So Sam, I'm really interested in learning more about kind of what y'all are doing in Florida specifically. You know, you founded, or you're one of the co-founders of the Florida Blockchain Business Association. Just kind of tell us a little about that story, kind of what led you to kind of starting that off, and maybe some of the things that y'all are doing within the association.
I mean, in a sense, just like a DAO was a community experiment, right? Like nonprofits are just more traditional DAOs, or antiquated DAOs, I guess you could say, formal. I had this idea and I said, okay, well, how can I not be alone? How can I build a team, right? And the best way to do that is to set up a nonprofit. So immediately what I did was I had the idea. I drove around to every big meetup in the state of Florida. So I went to all of our major cities like Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando, Tampa. And then Florida, is big. So we have some like medium-sized cities that are pretty important, like the Sarasotas of the world, or even Tallahassee, our capital. I went to all these meetups and I said, hey, here's my idea. You guys are doing this just because you love it. What if we took what you're doing in your community and then channeled that into political power and said, hey, let's start getting people up to our capital, or having them write their local congressmen and senators. Let's start getting organized. Before then, like, it's not a lot of people kind of think about this, but for example, like New York, you really have New York City, right? New York City has a population that's half the population of the whole state, right? It's like 11, 12 million people, something like that. The next biggest city in New York is like Buffalo, which is like 200,000, 300,000 in the metropolitan, right? Which is not that big. Florida, pretty well dispersed. You have a couple million in Miami, 1 or 2 million in Tampa, 1 or 2 million in Orlando, 1 million in Jacksonville. So everyone's really siloed here. And so I was able to essentially break all those silos, get all these community people talking and networking. And those silos still exist to the extent that, when you're in a bubble, you stay in your bubble. But now who else is around and how to communicate and organize. So that was kind of my big first push was, okay, well, how do I develop the network that currently doesn't exist and kind of lay the pipelines down so that going forward, everyone in Florida can start talking. Then upon formation of my Chamber of Commerce, literally we passed our first bill that year, the year after, and that was the Blockchain Task Force bill, which was like the Blockchain Task Force bill are pretty much like these useless bills that go through most states is like their first Bitcoin blockchain bill. But the goal is to build a task force for government to look into what they can use blockchain for. But it's like a marketing push. So now everyone hears the word blockchain. What is this task force doing? How can it educate us? Blah, 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 blah. And that's the goal. And it sets you up for the next year when you want to actually pass something substantial. Now everybody knows who you are, what you're doing, and what not. So that's kind of like one of the foundational first pieces of the legislation you'll see a lot of states pass to kind of get things going. Well, ever since that, it's just been, okay, well, what does the community want? What do our members want? And what are some innovative ideas that we can push here in the state? And every state's different. In my association, we have Space Florida as a member, right? Because Florida is obviously a big space and tech hub. And they want to know if we can put space cargo on the blockchain, right? Can you, can't you? It doesn't matter. They're curious and they say, well, we might need legislation to actually enact this, or we might want to get funding to actually do this because Space Florida is a quasi-government organization. So I go, okay, great. And now I have connections to Florida space programs, which is awesome. That's like the city of Melbourne and Space Center, Titusville and whatnot, which are like kind of smaller Florida cities, but also now booming because of everything Elon Musk is doing, for example. So, that's kind of what I do on the association side. It really is just like a giant talent pool and network for us to just ensure that we're represented across the state and that everybody across the state kind of knows who to go to in their locale. And if you're a representative, hopefully we have someone within, 50 miles of you who can go and say, hey, I live here. I can actually tell you what's going on. And that goal has been very, very successful and well achieved over the past 5 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are some of the things that y'all are working on now in terms of like some current things that are going on in Florida that y'all are seeing?
So Florida's legislative session, everything was based on the election, right? Because I needed to figure out kind of what our strategy was going to be going forward based on not only who won the presidential election, but who also was going to be in the Florida House and Senate. Even though it was always going to be Republicans here because Florida is such a red state, to know who was going to be where, who's going to be chairing what committee. Now that we have that information, it's kind of like, okay, well, now I know where my friendly people are, what committees they're on, and that sometimes determines what bills we can push. We've looked at all different kinds of things. So, for example, very simply, we've looked at DAO bills and how we can motivate DAOs to come to Florida. Our DAO bill, funny enough, which was written by John Montague, different than the Wyoming DAO bill, right? And funny, at the time last year, we were actually trying to figure out how we could make a bill that kind of targets the SEC and says the SEC doesn't have jurisdiction over Florida companies. Whether we could do that or not, it doesn't matter. We'd love to just create a lawsuit, for example. So that's the other fun thing about passing legislation is people will sometimes say, well, you can't do that. And it's like, well, you can do anything you want, actually. The sky's the limit. You just have to deal with the lawsuit later. Sometimes people are happy to deal with the lawsuit. Sometimes the lawsuit is the goal, right? A lot of people just don't understand that. Anytime someone's like, well, you can't pass this bill because the federal government does this, that, or the other thing. You really can in America do whatever you want to do. Anyone who's kind of a naysayer just doesn't understand how our power process works. Like you get a lot of lawyers who just kind of look and say, well, legally, you can only do this, that, or the other thing. But then you notice those rules don't apply if people have enough money or enough power. And then you go, oh, well, how can I just this stuff to not apply to me, right? So we've looked at DAO bills. Certainly looking at a Bitcoin strategic reserve bill now because that's kind of the new hot thing. State of Florida and its pension fund has actually already bought assets in the past. The way that works is Florida has a pension fund. The pension fund doles out part of its funds to hedge funds. And those hedge funds will have a mandate. And some of those have been hedge funds that have invested in things like a Coinbase or a Solana, right? And made big bags off of that. Is it technically the state of Florida? Oh, but it's the state of Florida's money, right, being used to get to work. So we've looked at bills that will maybe encourage the actual state of Florida to invest in digital assets or even things like a Bitcoin ETF, putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And then there's more complicated bills like Article 12, UCC Article 12, which is just a very boring bill that standardizes a lot of things across different states as far as digital assets are concerned. We've looked at setting up a court of chancery here, which is a huge overhaul, but there's like 3 or 4 states that have a court of chancery, which means there's a separate court system for businesses. That way you can get judges who understand some of the technicals around certain things. Delaware has a court of chancery. That's why their business environment there is so friendly. So if you're a business suing another business or going over some IP law, Delaware has a specific corporate judiciary to go over those things. So we'd love to have a court of chancery for like AI and crypto and any innovative tech. But that's a huge push, right? You're changing the entire court system in a state. And we're the 3rd most populous state and the 4th largest economy, right? So, Florida politics is very complicated. You want to talk about incentives and what and where. But that's kind of what we're looking at now. I'd still love to push for like a token taxonomy here, just saying like either you're a currency, a security, or an asset. We'll see, because with the administration and with Gary Gensler finally being fired, right, some of the stuff that I've looked at, we might not have a need for, right? The feds might just come in and say, hey, we're actually just going to do some of this for you guys, which means we can kind of focus on priorities on maybe more forward looking or innovative things instead of having to be worried about playing defense, which is, pretty tough. I mean, playing defense, you have to be reactive. You can try to be proactive, but being able to be offensive now is a huge relief and something we're looking forward to here. So we'll see. We'll find out.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was actually, you mentioned Gary Gensler announcing his resignation. I was going to ask you about that. Like, so now that, that's on the table, that's happening, what do you kind of see as being like the next steps from here? Like, I know we don't know the new SEC chair, but kind of what are some of the things that you see as happening from there?
I think it's just going to be a golden age for the U.S. in a variety of ways. And that was one of my markets, like to people for voting for Trump. If you were in crypto, like it was very obvious that if Kamala Harris won, Gensler would not leave, and in fact, he'd actually probably be more emboldened. And if you ask any company, taxes suck, but you can deal with taxes. With a overburdensome regulatory environment or where you feel like you're being targeted and sued by a government that has unlimited funds is a lot more scary and a lot more detrimental to business. To take out the key person who's suing everybody and the key regulatory fear is a very big deal. So bar none, if nothing else happens and just Gary Gensler leaves, that's a huge win for the United States. And I think countries or companies in other countries are going to finally say, hey, I think it's kind of safe to come back to the US and start doing business here, right? Because we're not just going to get sued into oblivion or be scared of prison, right? That's a very big deal. Now it's just about, well, what's the executive going to do? Like, is Trump going to set up a Bitcoin strategic reserve? What's Congress going to do? Is Cynthia Lummis and, some of the people in the House going to be able to pass some stable coin legislation? For example, I know that stable coins are probably up on the docket and a big priority about regulation around them and who can issue them and what they can be used for. That's also been a big turnaround, is the US government realizing that stable coins actually help promote the dollar, right? I think Tether, maybe one of you know this, Tether might be the largest owner of US treasuries now, which is a crazy thing to think about. Right. So why are we going to try to hurt Tether when they're literally funding US government debt, right? And being a proxy for the US dollar? Like, Tether's awesome. So we should be doing everything we can then to promote stable coins if we want US dollar dominance, which is funny because, of course, Bitcoiners and crypto people maybe hate the US dollar, but I like the US dollar. Do I like fiat currency? Not really, but it's here and I'm an American. And I want to make sure the dollar's strong because it's good for America, but I also love things like Bitcoin. So I think you can love both. But I'm very bullish on where America's going. Like I said, with just Gensler being gone, everything else is just a cherry on top.
Yeah, one of the cool things, well, outside of Gensler, like he's, like you said, I think you alluded to it, like regulation through enforcement is like a very stupid way of doing things. And I just think about this, it's like, being Canadian originally and then being an adopted son of Texas now, I just wonder, immigrant parents, like obviously my parents were like, hey, you want to go to America because you want to go to America because you'll get the best education there and you'll be meeting some of the most smartest people on the planet. And they encourage innovation and creativity, right? And I got this all throughout the 90s and 2000s. And I would just imagine you had this same kind of environment when, like the internet was taking off. Right? Like, I wonder, would we even have some of the good things? And by and large, there are many, many good things. And then there are some bad things, of course, but like, we wouldn't be where we are today. I don't think we would have ever had this like blessing that it's like this technology vehicle has changed every facet of our lives from like enterprise to consumer. Right. And I'm just hopeful that this administration would kind of appreciate this technology stack and see like, hey guys, this can not only change financial rails, but like, guys, we can apply this stack and this technology stack into other places to increase efficiency a great deal, right? And also increase transparency. Unfortunately, and like you said, like, dude, the big scary thing that me and my co-founder, and I think all of us in this space have gone through, right? Like you came in, like Taylor introduced you to Bitcoin like super early and you still have that Bitcoin wallet, right? And like, even by association, let's assume your path took a completely different thing. I know your brother serves in the force, serves for the country, and he's back home now. I was telling Sam earlier, that's awesome. Also, the fact that you are taller than your bigger brother, I will shame him about that too by association.
Shout out. That's right.
So you make sure you just give him just one clip. Be like, Sam's taller, bro. That's what it is. But it is kind of crazy. If your path went in that direction, right, would you be part of this choke point 2.0 message where it's like, hey, just because you hold this asset, we're going to like burden you by like trying to figure out everything that's there is to be about you. And it's like, dude, the blockchain's public. You can literally see all the transactions that are happening there, right? Which is hilarious. It becomes this weird kind of like Ouroborean kind of like argument that they fall into. But I am really hoping that this new administration is really, really good. And it's also great that like there's a lot of pro digital asset people that are there. Lucky to see Trump in Nashville. I know you were in Nashville too. I was trying to get Luke to come out there. Hopefully he's going to make it to Vegas, right? Absolutely. This upcoming year. But yeah, man, I'm really excited about this because one of the big concerns we were like, dude, like if we build anything, it's like we're always thinking, and I hate this because it's like you want to move fast and break things, right? And then you want to ask for forgiveness, not for permission. Because if you ask for permission, then it's just like legal becomes the big vehicle in an entire startup to be like, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? And then you spend like hours and hours, if not days and months, just trying to get like, oh, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to be at? Like, how do I do this? And it's just like, maybe you should just build a product and see if a consumer really wants to use it first before you start thinking about that, right? If not, you're front loaded all the wrong things. And now we don't have to go overseas anymore, right? Because I know a lot of countries are trying to push the regulations such that like, hey, you're working in this tech sector. If you're working in AI, if you're working in energy, if you're working in crypto, please come over here. We'll give you a residency. We'll make special like SEZ zones for you, or just straight up just reduce the tax for you. And, you know, a lot of talent. I know I have a good amount of friends chatting on Telegram during Token 2049 in Dubai. It was funny. I was making this comment where it's like, bro, you'd be surprised how many Japanese people and Chinese people are in Dubai. And it's simply because they are like taxed to hell with things, or they just have no clarity. And it's like, I'm just going to go to some place that wants to accept me. And I don't feel like I have to look over my shoulder while every single day I'm meeting with my product team and like getting products out rather than just meeting with my legal team every single day.
I think lawyers are definitely not happy with the election outcome, right? I think lawyers are very interesting. I'm always fascinated by lawyers because I love lawyers. I work with attorneys all the time. But once again, they have a very specific and certain mindset where they love things being in a box because you have to put things in a box as an attorney. Because at the end of the day, and to be fair to them, like it's their ass on the line if they're not fulfilling their responsibilities to you. Kind of. I mean, I guess I've seen all the time where founders go to jail and the lawyer's like, oops, sorry, right? People are like, oh, I have a great attorney. Like, oh, well, that didn't really help you much, huh? But yeah, like if you don't need to worry about legal anytime you have a brilliant idea, right? I mean, how many ideas are stopped because someone just says, well, is that legal? Right? And I'm not talking about like, oh, you should go create a meth selling startup, right? Like, no, just anything financial and innovative, and let people be able to innovate or at least think about innovative ideas without, well, we just raised $1 million, but half of that has to go to attorneys, right? As opposed to human capital and tech investment where it is way better spent. So that's why I think, once again, like the regulatory clarity and just not having to wait, like even like you mentioned, Choke Point 2.0, a huge win. If we don't have to worry about getting bank accounts, like Silvergate and Silicon Valley Bank, like if they were still alive today, you know, had Trump been around and Gensler been gone, you know, in 2020, right, in 2021, 2022, like what would that scenario look like? Now we survived and that's fine. And hopefully going forward, that kind of stuff won't happen again, right? But still, like what did Silvergate and Silicon Valley Bank, what did that do to the industry when I think they were targeted and purposefully pushed to fail? Right? Like that sets everything back. That kills momentum, right? That hurts real innovation. Just not having to deal with that problem is a huge win, right? Just not having to even think about If you can just get in a founder's mind and tell them you don't even have to worry about banking or legal, it frees up so much mental space for creativity and actual focus on innovation. That's why I'm just very excited, because as we get rid of those burdens, like I said, anything we can do positive is great, but not having to worry about negatives is a huge plus.
100%. And the banking thing, like you said, I know, and I think Luke will dive into my co-founder's experience with this too. Being a CEO, dude, you have no idea how many hours I spent having to talk to banks about being hey, we have we're doing a legitimate thing here. We're a technology vehicle here. We have good people on there with KYC, AML. These are all legitimate investors. We're more than happy to share this with you. But the number of banks, I distinctly remember going to the Wells Fargo bank that we have here. We've banked there personally for a number of years. Even my previous startup, which was outside of crypto, they were yeah, no worries. You're good to go. And then I told them hey, we're working in fintech. We sometimes do some Web 2 stuff and a lot of Web 3 stuff. And they're oh, you said Web 3 in crypto. That means we're going to have to go through a 6-month process of vetting everything that's there. And I'm even if I give you all the documentation, you see everyone that's there, everything that's there, there's nothing nefarious happening. They're no, it's going to take 6 months. And it's really funny. I went up to Wyoming to a conference there, and I met a bunch of people, and I had to go to Wyoming to get a bank account. It was wild. And I was this shouldn't be that hard, guys. We're not trying to do anything crazy here. I'm in the state of Texas. I love Texas. And this was one of these weird things where during the conference, everyone was they were much like you saying. I was at another conference in New York very recently, a couple of weeks back. All the big digital asset players were there. BlackRock, Fidelity, not the Super State, which is doing RWA stuff. Shout out to Jim and Robert. They were on the pod earlier. And one of the big questions was all US, stable coins. And I'm okay, that's all good and dandy, but who the hell is going to take a bank account for a startup? That's the funniest thing. Solve that one first problem, guys. Just have clarity on that on a state level, at least, that gets this done. I mean, I'm hoping that I really feel that could be an asymmetric advantage for any state that does that. Be hey, we have clear lines that say you fall in this category, we will bank you. If you're doing any nefarious shit, we're obviously going to come down on you and throw the books at you. No one's starting any meth labs, don't get me wrong. But the reality is I think Texas, Florida, and Wyoming can do these things, and they would have huge advantages where the amount of intellectual capital that they would garner from these traditional places where it's just a nightmare to try and do business because of taxes and no real clarity on things in New York or the Bay or anything like that would be insane. I shouldn't have to spend nearly 6 hours in emails and calls and all this shit over this period of time to do that. That's 6 hours I'm never going to get back. And yeah, man, it's just, I guess that's my question. My next question would be when can we get a law in Florida that says, and anyone who's in Texas in the legislator, who's legislation level, listening to this, when can we get laws that define clearly, hey, you're a crypto company, we're more than happy to open your bank accounts here. Can you make this happen in Florida?
Very
or push
hard
to make this happen.
So I've met and had countless meetings with the Florida Bankers Association multiple times, and I know their heads. And what's funny is their president now here in Florida, so you used to work for a crypto compliance company. What's interesting, and you kind of see how these things play out politically, is after 2008, Dodd-Frank so the Florida Bankers Association is supposed to be a association for state banks, but they allow in federal banks. Well, their membership used to be 3-to-1 state banks and federal banks, right? So for every one federal bank, there were 3 state banks. Now that's inversed because there's been such centralization in the banking industry to where now the Florida Bankers Association's largest clients are the Chase, Wells Fargo, JP Morgans of the world, right? What that means is there's no incentive for them to say, well, we want to bring business to Florida, because they're national banks, right? They're there to just almost represent banks as a whole and banking policy, and they're always fighting with credit unions and like interest rate laws and stuff like that. I've had those conversations, and it's very hard because then you're going up against a lot of money, a lot of people who, even though people in Florida understand crypto more now, as soon as you start trying to carve out regulations and touch banking, well, now it's a very hard battle. It's a very tough battle. Fortunately, we have some banks now who are just like, hey, we'll bank crypto, right? I mean, that was the real issue with Choke Point 2.0, was if you were banking crypto companies, the feds essentially said, well, we're going to take a very hard look at you, right? And treat you unfairly. Everyone was very scared of being the next Silicon Valley bank. We had banks here in Florida who literally right after that shuttered all their crypto companies and said, hey, you got to find a new bank. How do you legislatively fix that? Well, technically, there's no legislative problem because banks have the ability to do this. The problem is intimidation from federal positions, federal level, that are looking at your KYC, AML, or your banking regulations. That's where it gets tough. I mean, that's the fight Caitlin Long's having right now. Well, why didn't my banking get approved when I had some federal regulators say, yeah, everything's good, but then you still denied me, right? And she has a good stuff on the dual banking system because state and federal banks are supposed to be two systems, but it's kind of turned into just one, and it's just federal banks now, which is not good. So, the legislative part is tough because, once again, like getting a bill through and then fighting federal banks is very hard. And even if you do win, once again, they could have clear guardrails, but then still have the arms of the federal government say, well, hey, if you're one of these banks, we're putting you on a list, putting you on like a banking no-fly list, right? Where you're going to be subject to procedures and extra reporting and whatnot that even in some cases may be unrealistic. So, I mean, once again, that shows you how even with what I do on a state level, what happens at the federal level impacts me in a big way. So hopefully now with the new administration, that won't be a problem, and banks will just feel safe enough to where I don't have to pass or even think about passing legislation. They will just feel more open to banking crypto and Web3 companies.
Yeah, because like that's one of the big things, right? Because I feel like both Wyoming and I know even in Texas, like I went to a dinner last week about this guy who's a big Solana guy, and he's wanting to try and then push for better legislation and like better transparency around like, hey, if we are bringing entrepreneurs in from the Solana ecosystem into like literally Texas, like can we get them up and running like quicker, right? I think that's one of those things where it's like if we can get the little things sorted and we let entrepreneurs like focus on building the product, like I say, I think that would be a really, really good thing. I mean, I can't find any other problem in my personal experience with our current startup that would be like a good way to get that time back. Because the amount of nights that I've had to like think about just, all the implications of things is just like neural capital that I'll never get back. And that's just kind of sad. But I really hope that, you guys like get it right, because then that sets them up. And I really don't care. I love Texas, but don't get me wrong. Like, I really don't care whether it's Wyoming or Florida or Texas gets this right, because then at least it sets a precedent where you can be like, look, they did it. And like, I'm a strong believer that I think that like the universe has given everyone the same amount of talent and the exact same amount of time. It's just how you apply it, right? So it's not that these guys and girls are smarter than us. They just were harder working and they really applied themselves to solve this particular problem. So I really hope that something magical happens. And if you guys make the breakthrough in Florida, man, who knows? We might even set up shop in Florida. Who knows? It might be a crazy thing. I know my co-founder loves Florida. Like, I'm personally a Texas guy, but like, I'm rooting for you, man. I really am.
I appreciate that. It's tough, but it takes time, right? And, you see your investments in the political process start to pay off. And that's why you have to start. Like, and you won't see change immediately, but that's why I always tell people, like, you got to be in this for the next 2 to 5 years, right? Because you have to build the relationships, build the trust, watch campaigns come and go, watch congressmen come and go, but still keep pushing and keep those relationships, because otherwise nothing will ever get done. And the people who are counter to what you believe will have influence and have the ears of these people if you're not speaking to them. So it's just something that has to be done and that you have to do.
Cool. So what are some of the things that you think, so if somebody's listening and they, kind of resonate with some of the things that we're talking about that need to be changed, what would you recommend that they do to get started? Obviously, if they're in Florida, they can partner with you all, but is there anything that just other folks that might be listening, either here in Texas or elsewhere, that you would recommend to get started in helping to create that change?
I mean, it depends on how much time you have and what you actually want to do, right? I mean, it's easy to be on Twitter, and that's fine. Like, it is a time commitment. A lot of people say, "Man, I just want to go and I want to start making change," but it takes time, and there's no instant gratification, right? You're not making money; you're building relationships and influence. So I'm a part of the USBC, which is the U.S. Blockchain Coalition. So essentially, what me and some of the bigger states did that, hey, we need to coordinate with all 50 states on policy that we can push at once, right? And kind of set up standards and rules. So we have about 45 states now with associations and leads in those states who are kind of spearheading policy in their capital. So I can connect anyone with like a representative in their state. Hopefully, whatever state you're in, that representative has made themselves known enough online to where you can kind of easily find them. The biggest thing is it just depends on, anyone can go and meet with their congressman, right? I live in St. Pete. I mean, I donated to my city council and my county commissioners, right? And I built relationships there. Is that really useful for me? Oh, from a business perspective, but personally, yes, because I want to be integrated in what's going on and where I live, right? And I want to know, and great, if I can get the city of St. Pete to get into crypto and Bitcoin, that's awesome. But, as a local resident, there's other issues I care about as well that literally directly affect me. So if you have the time, start figuring out, one, who your representatives are and just meet with them and say, hey, right, there's so many benefits to doing that. And I could just start listing them off. But that's the first part, is actually figure out like how involved you want to be in your community. If you decide, well, my community is something I want to take seriously, start at the local level. There's a lot of impact you can make there. It's easier to make change to your city or to your county than it is to your state or on a federal level, because you don't always need money, right? Once again, if you're a resident and you live there, I mean, you can annoy the crap out of those people as much as you want. I go to county and city commission meetings. I see people there every time saying the same thing, right? And they're very well known, right? So it's just like, what's in it for you? Because I've been saying that pitch all the time, like, oh, get involved, make a call. Sometimes that's cool. But if you're really interested, which I think is the best benefit of building community, like just going local and starting there.
Just want to make this point. I think like this is the other very interesting thing. And I think that I'm guilty of this too, to be very clear. Like, I feel like sometimes we're just so myopic in just like our own world, right? And we have these frustrations that clearly affect our bubble, right? Like I think it's in every industry, but in tech even more so, right? Because the speed of things is just so insane. So you have to be myopic. And then you have these problems, like you said, like that are state level problems, federal level problems, and they interfere in your life, right? No one realizes this shit until like they step on you, right? It's kind of like it's their problem, so I really don't care. And I'm definitely guilty of this fact of like, oh, it's their problem. It's not localized to me, so I'm not going to take an effort. And as a result, I feel like there's a whole generation of like builders and just people and citizens of the country that are just like, yeah, I am going to be disconnected from this thing. It's like they see what's happening through the media, and the media is absolute dog shit, right? Any of the traditional media is absolutely terrible, right? And I don't care what flag you salute to in terms of like red or blue or like whatever it is. The reality is it's red, white, and blue, right? So you need to be understanding of all the colors in the political spectrum here. But the fact is that like it's almost like we were kind of programmed into like not caring on the local level about things that are there. And now we see these problems where it's like this runaway train of regulation and big government that just supposedly thinks that they know everything. And as a result, like now it's affecting all of us. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a thought that I just want to like emphasize, like to what you're saying. You got to get involved in the grassroots level on things. And then who knows, maybe those relationships can go onto a state level and a federal level. And I just think that that's commendable. That's a very, very poignant thought.
And to be fair, like most people just don't have time, right? If you're a CEO, why are you not running marketing? Why are you not running biz dev? You don't have time, right? And so that's why people like me exist, because I'm B2G is what I call it. Like you have B2B, B2C, I'm B2G, so I'm business to government. So I'm here to help people understand and navigate those environments because frankly, like it shouldn't be something that occupies your brain, right? If it's a hobby and for fun, it's a whole nother conversation because like, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, one of the most powerful political movers and shakers was stay-at-home moms, right? Because those were the ones literally running the community. They were on the PTAs. They were running the neighborhood associations because they were home so they could meet up and organize, right? Whereas the husband's off at work, can't even think about that. You're just trying to make money, right? So you see how those relationships change. And it really is like if you're running a business, you shouldn't have to be keeping track of all this stuff, right? Someone should be kind of your right hand man. And I think that's why you're seeing now, or companies are realizing that on your C suite, there has to be some government affairs guy now, right? That's just as important as the CMO and the CTO and the COO. Sometimes that's your lawyer, but your lawyer doesn't really talk to government. Your lawyer's just there to interpret the law and give you opinions. So I think the future, you're going to see a lot more startups and companies prioritizing, okay, well, we need a government guy just to kind of keep us abreast of what's happening.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Because I mean, there's only so much mind share you can have on things too, right? Like there's constantly things changing in the government space, and so having that person to do that, I think, makes a ton of sense. Very cool. So one other thing I did want to chat a little bit about. So I had a chance to peek at your YouTube channel. You have a lot of great content there. So what are some of the things that you're like focusing on within your content as well? Like messages you want to get out, that kind of thing.
I'd like to talk about political strategy and hopefully give people like a different perspective. Try not to get into like what's right and what's wrong, so to speak. I try to tell people why I think what's happening is happening. Like I'm probably going to do a video later today on one of Trump's appointments and someone pulling out, and it's like, okay, well, why are they pulling out? This person might be pulling out. Like a lot of people hate him, a lot of people like him. I don't really care whether you hate him or like him. Let's think about like why was he appointed to begin with, and what are some reasons why he might be pulling out beyond just what we think. You might think, oh well, he's got bad character, the media's done hit pieces, but it's never like that. There's always some other stuff. So I'm always trying to figure out, well, what does that look like? How can we think differently? I just did a video on and Elon running Doge, and as exciting as I think that is, I was trying to think, okay, well, how will that actually work? And how can we make sure that they're able to succeed? For example, if they just start cutting jobs, right? Well, what if they cut jobs in a district that's a swing district, and now they turn that district from red to blue? And then in the midterms, they lose the House. And by losing the House, now Trump can't fulfill his priorities. So then Doge is pointless anyway. So I talk to people about what I think political efficiency is as opposed to just being financially efficient. And so I'm telling people you have to win the political battle first to then get your policies implemented. I try to be just very like kind of matter of fact in like, hey, here's how I think it is, whether I think that's right or wrong. That's a good way to kind of see how politicos and strategists think, because a lot of them are hired hands who don't care about Democratic or Republican beliefs because they're hired to just help you get your agenda across the finish line. And so they'll do whatever it takes as far as marketing or policy or legalese to make that work. So that's kind of what I try to focus some of my content on.
Yeah, and I really like that. I had a chance to view a couple of your videos, and that was one thing I really appreciated on it. I feel like nowadays a lot of the things you see politically are telling you what to think, and I feel like yours is more, it's thought provoking, it's giving, ideas around what could happen based on a chain of events, but it's not saying this is right or this is wrong. So I think it's just a great approach to sharing things and getting people thinking as opposed to, telling them to think this way or not.
Absolutely, that's the goal.
Yeah,
Sure.
I've also got to shout out your Twitter spaces, man. I know you work with Cardone quite a lot. I think that's a very interesting example where it's like you've had someone who's like been successful in the business world, and then has seen the value of digital assets as not only something to be allocating to, but in terms of like a technology vehicle. And those Twitter spaces are amazing, man. And it's super frank and relatable, right? It's not like esoteric where you see a bunch of like government people or high level business people just talking about shit. It's like, no, you're actually having a real conversation with these people. And that's pretty fucking awesome. I would love to hear a little bit about that, if you don't mind, like, and share like how you met the Cardones and like the efforts that you're doing over there as well. I know he also gave a very passionate speech at the Madison Square Garden event for the Trump rally, which is really, really cool. And dude, like, yeah, I would just love to hear more about that if that's cool.
So Gary and I had probably known each other for like 3 years just because he's based in Florida and he knew the political work that I did. And we ended up meeting up one day, and he'll say this all the time, like he had never donated to a political person until he met me, right? And so as soon as we met, we did a fundraiser for Anna Polina Luna, who's our congresswoman here in Pinellas County. He donated to some of the city council members, and then he ended up doing a big fundraiser for Donald Trump at Nashville. His eyes have been open because he was like, I never understood this, but now I do. And now the amount of influence and the network that he has grown exponentially because of his involvement in politics, right? And he's been like, wow, why haven't I been doing this sooner? So me and him have just built a really good relationship, right? I also love the Twitter spaces because it's a good balance of finance and legal and political, kind of whatever we want to talk about on that day. They're very casual, and he's continued to grow his influence very, very well. It's very interesting just because now you have someone like Gary who's hopefully able to now use their expertise to coach an administration on this industry, right? Whereas before, had he not been politically involved, that opportunity wouldn't even been there. I mean, he gave Vivek like a large sum of money very early on to support his run for president. And now Vivek's close with Trump. And so that's helped him also get close with Trump. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one example of how no matter where you're at, you can always get involved in this process, and there's benefits beyond it politically. There's tons of business development advantages to being involved in politics, right? Because I always tell people, like, when you go to a political fundraiser, every top company is going to be there in that area, right? And so you're meeting with high net worth individuals who are there who also have the same idea. I mean, it's not hard. You're supporting a Democrat or a Republican, so you can assume everyone else there is Republican or Democrat. So it's very easy to talk to as opposed to a traditional networking event. You don't know what people believe or what they're doing. But there you're like, yeah, I like this issue. I like that issue. Oh, what do you do? Okay, you run this business. That's great. So it's very good biz dev to also get politically active. And I think Gary's seen that as well in a large way. So, yeah, I mean, he's a great example of, how you can get politically activated very easily. I mean, he did all that just this year, and now he's been propelled forward in the political space, and I think in a huge way.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta ask one thing about that's not crypto. I gotta ask about energy. And I'm curious to see what energy is a big thing, obviously, in Texas, right? Like ERCOT's a real powerhouse here. Pardon the pun. We have the energy corridor in Houston, right? Like one of the things that we're also starting to see with crypto is the fact that, you need tremendous amounts of energy to obviously keep these networks alive and keep that, whether it's centralized or decentralized or somewhere in between or progressive decentralization, all these things, you need energy. Right. And ML becoming a big thing. Energy is even more so important. Right. Unfortunately, one of the things is like I had some interesting statistics that I came about in Jackson where they were talking about SMR and, level 3, level 4 kind of reactor systems and trying to see that, like, dude, you don't get it. Like the amount of energy we would need over the next 10 years, like we're not even suited for right now. Like we can't even. We have 94 nuclear power plants across the country, which is wild. But the problem is like, we have this like huge movement. And I'm pretty sure that we all grew up with this, right? The green movement where it's like, oh, let's turn off nuclear. Let's go completely solar and let's go completely wind. But the reality is like we need stable base loaded energy to power these systems on these two huge energy sink tech stacks, right? Whether it's crypto and ML. I'm curious to see what are your thoughts on that? with Gary, with Florida, and like I guess also so in a state and federal level. I was just because that's a very kind of close topic for us too, with decentralized AI and just AI companies and crypto in general.
Bitcoin and AI policy are energy policy. And both those fields, I think, are going to drive an energy renaissance, I think, in the US. Now seeing people even on the progressive side of the aisle relook at nuclear, right? Like the Biden administration has started relooking at nuclear. Nuclear used to be bad because they don't like fossil fuels, but fossil fuels are incredibly reliable, right? And incredibly abundant. And we have the infrastructure for them. Solar and wind cannot sustainably power the AI revolution. That is just a fact. Even if they become incredibly efficient over the next 10 years, they'll never be able to do it, especially at scale. You have to have nuclear and you have to have fossil fuels to do so. I'm fine with fossil fuels being clean and being like the best we can to manage that. But Bitcoin and AI are going to force, if we want them to succeed, force government to relook and rethink energy innovation. And you're already seeing that happen. We've been shutting down nuclear power plants, right? But now I don't think that's going to be happening anymore. We're going to have to rebuild them. The problem is it just takes so long to build them. But now you're looking at like micro nuclear power plants and some of them that can be set up in like a 2 to 3 year period, for example. Yeah, I mean, I've told people that in the past. Like, I know people who work on Bitcoin mining policy, and I'm like, you're just going to be an energy policy guy at the end of the day, because beyond custody, all you're going to focus on is energy. You better make sure energy is reliable and in the best parts that you can get it, at the cheapest you can get it. Otherwise, you don't have an industry, right? And you're going to see hubs where energy is cheap and efficient. That's where all the AI and Bitcoin miners are going to be. You're already seeing that, and it's actually becoming increasingly competitive. So actually, I'm very excited because as long as those incentives are there, both parties are going to have to be very aggressive with pushing forward energy. So I think this industry, this tech industry, is going to bring about an energy renaissance with it by necessity.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to add on this is just like a startling kind of statistic where it said that if you look at China, and by the way, so a lot of like the nuclear tech, someone told me it was built on Westinghouse tech. So it's originally from the United States, right? We were left out the patents there. They're built and improved on the tech substantially, right? And if you look at China, the amount of time that they have to take to get a nuclear level 4 or level 3 kind of plant up is like 6 years. Even South Korea, like it's like 6 years, right? It's insane. In the United States, it takes anywhere between 10 to 12, if not double that time. It is wild. And the amount of regulation and red tape that we have around this stuff is insane. And if we're really trying to feed this, and by the way, to be very clear, I think having strong energy policy that's not necessarily IP gated is a good thing for the entire world. Because like the more energy kind of sufficient each of these governments and these countries are, the better it is. I have a feeling there'll be less conflicts, right? Because then you don't fight wars. Most of the wars are about stupid amount of energy, right? And I'm like, dude, just think about it. Like if we're seeing these huge developments happening in other parts of the world, we should be asking ourselves like, dude, why are they so good at this? Even if it was our tech originally, I'm like, I don't give a shit about the fact that it was our tech. They're deploying it in a way better way. We should be learning from these people and then adopting things to like make it better. And the reason why I mentioned South Korea and China is like because most people get away with the fact that, oh, China, because like, they have an authoritarian regime. And it's like, dude, look at South Korea. They're a democracy. They're one of our biggest allies in that entire region. And it takes them 6 years to get a plan up. Why does it take us double the amount of time? Even if you exclude labor and building materials and all that stuff, I have a feeling that the amount of regulation and litigation and all this legal bullshit, mumbo jumbo nonsense really hampers us. And it's like, I'm really hoping that Doge and those guys would like, actually, that would be the ideal place to make an asymmetric advantage. Be like, bro, we're going to take an axe to this energy policy in terms of like getting rid of all this fucking regulation so that we can basically make it better so that for all of us to do this shit. It is just wild. Like, I really hope that happens because like, I'm a dad. I have a 3.5-year-old. I'm hoping that she'll grow up in an environment, and Texas forever. But like I said, if Florida has good banking regulation, I might just move there. But I want my daughter to like basically grow up in an era where it's like that isn't an issue anymore, right? Like we have progressive kind of ideas to like adopt these tech stacks and make it better, right? And that would be a huge win. I feel like if that's one thing that we get right, I feel like the next 50 years of us as a country, and if not this planet, would just be like way better, man. I really hope that also like you guys push on that level too, and then get some good stuff happening there. Sorry for my rant there. I just got all this data and I was like, holy shit, like this is insane when you think about this. Like double the time? That's wild, guys. That's just wild.
When it's something like energy is crucial and essential, that's not good. That's not good at all.
Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Well, Sam, this has been great having you on, man. Really appreciate all the great insights that you have, and I'm definitely plan to dig into your content a little bit more. But before we close out, anything that you'd want to share with anyone listening around how to stay in touch with you, or just any kind of messages you have for anyone that's listening?
I mean, you guys can find me very easily on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all those normal socials. It's just Samuel Arms, ARMES. And then I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm happy to come back on anytime. Love your audience, love what you guys are doing in Texas. So I am here to support any way that I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Sam. It's been great having you with us. And yeah, we look forward to having you back on.
Again, guys.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ATX DAO Podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. To learn more about ATX DAO, visit us at atxdao.com and follow us on X, Farcaster, and LinkedIn at ATX DAO. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.